My name is Sergeant Rayon Sandoval, New Mexico State Police, badge number 2847. I served for 31 years before they forced me into early retirement, claiming PTSD and psychological instability. They weren't entirely wrong about that last part, but not for the reasons they think. You can't patrol the high desert of New Mexico for 3 decades without seeing things that change you. Things that make you question everything you thought you knew about reality. But what happened on Highway 666 during the summer of 2003 didn't just change me. It fundamentally altered my understanding of what exists in those vast stretches of nothing between Gallup and the Colorado border. They've changed the name now, calling it U.S. Route 491, claiming it was just to eliminate confusion with other highways. But those of us who worked that stretch of asphalt know the real reason. Too many incidents, too many reports that couldn't be explained away. Too many officers like me who came back from patrol shifts unable to articulate what they'd witnessed out there in the desert darkness. The bureaucrats in Santa Fe thought changing the numbers would somehow change what happens on that road. They were wrong. You can paint over rust, but it keeps eating through the metal underneath. I need to tell this story now because I'm getting older, and the other officers who know what I know are either dead, missing, or too scared to talk. The younger generation of troopers, they don't understand why the old-timers avoid certain patrol routes. Why we always check our mirrors, even in broad daylight. Why we never ever stop at mile marker 37 after sunset. They think we're superstitious, traumatized by too many fatal accidents. Too many years of seeing the worst humanity has to offer. They don't realize that humanity isn't the worst thing you can encounter on the highways of New Mexico. The high desert is a peculiar kind of beautiful during the day. The landscape stretches out in every direction, painted in shades of red and brown, dotted with sage and juniper, broken only by the ancient mesas that rise like the broken teeth of some buried giant. The sky is so vast it makes you feel insignificant, just another speck of dust blown across the endless expanse. But at night, that beauty transforms into something else entirely. The darkness out there isn't like city darkness or even forest darkness. It's absolute primordial, the kind of black that makes you understand why ancient peoples believed in demons and monsters. And maybe they weren't wrong. I grew up in Farmington in the northwestern corner of the state where the Navajo, Ute, and Apache lands all come together. My grandmother was half Navajo, and she used to tell me stories about the desert that would make my skin crawl, stories about skinwalkers, about the Jindy, the evil spirits that remain after death, about places where the veil between worlds grows thin. I always thought they were just stories, cautionary tales meant to keep children from wandering off into the desert. It wasn't until I became a state trooper that I realized my grandmother wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to prepare me. My first posting was in Gallup, right on the edge of the Navajo Nation. It's a rough town, plagued by poverty, alcoholism, and all the social problems that come with being caught between two worlds. But the real education came when I started working the night shifts on Highway 666. The other officers called it the Devil's Highway, and not just because of the number. That road has a reputation going back decades, maybe longer. Even before it was paved, when it was just a dirt track used by traders and military convoys, people reported strange things happening along that route. The official statistics will tell you that Highway 666 had an unusually high rate of fatal accidents, well above the national average for rural highways. What they won't tell you is how many of those accidents had no logical explanation. How many vehicles were found crashed with no skid marks, no signs of mechanical failure, no evidence of driver impairment. They won't tell you about the drivers who were found catatonic behind the wheel, their hair turned white, unable or unwilling to say what they'd seen. They certainly won't tell you about the ones who simply vanished. Their cars found running on the side of the road with no trace of where they'd gone. I'd been on the horse for about 3 years when I had my first real encounter with whatever inhabits that stretch of road. It was late July, the height of summer, when the desert heat doesn't really break even at night. The temperature gauge in my cruiser read 89 degrees at 2 o'clock a.m. as I patrolled north from Gallup toward Shiprock. The radio was quiet, which wasn't unusual for a Tuesday night. Most people had enough sense to avoid traveling that road in the dark if they could help it. I was running radar near mile marker 35 tucked behind an outcropping of rock that provided good concealment from southbound traffic when I saw the lights. At first, I thought it was just another vehicle. Maybe someone with their high beams on, but the lights were wrong. They were too bright, and they seemed to pulse with a rhythm that made my eyes water. I stepped out of my cruiser, thinking maybe it was someone in distress, perhaps having car trouble. The lights were maybe a /4 mile up the road, stationary, right in the middle of the highway. As I watched, the lights suddenly shot straight up into the air, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. They hovered there for a moment, maybe 500 feet up, then disappeared. Not gradually, not flying away, just gone, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there in the dark, my hand instinctively on my service weapon, trying to process what I just witnessed. My rational mind was already working to explain it away. Military aircraft from White Sands, weather balloon, optical illusion caused by the heat. But my gut knew better. My gut knew I'd just seen something that didn't belong in our world. I got back in my cruiser and drove to where the lights had been. The asphalt was hot, much hotter than it should have been, and there was a smell in the air like ozone and burnt metal. My radio started acting up, cycling through frequencies on its own, picking up what sounded like voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Then, clear as day, I heard my grandmother's voice come through the static. She'd been dead for 5 years at that point. She said my name once, Ramon. In that way, she used to when she was worried about me, and then the radio went completely dead. I sat there in my cruiser for maybe 10 minutes, engine running, every instinct screaming at me to drive away as fast as I could. But I was a cop and cops investigate. So I got out again, flashlight in hand, and started examining the road. That's when I found the prints. They were burned into the asphalt. 3 perfect circles arranged in a triangle, each about 3 feet in diameter. The asphalt inside the circles had been melted and reformed into a glass-like substance that reflected my flashlight beam in ways that hurt to look at. I took photos, made measurements, wrote everything down in my notepad with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I was going to file a report, demand an investigation, get answers. But when I got back to the station at the end of my shift, something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way the other officers looked at me when I started to tell them what I'd seen. The way their expression shifted from interest to concern to that particular kind of pity reserved for someone who's cracking under the pressure. Maybe it was remembering all the officers who'd reported similar things and then found themselves transferred to desk duty or encouraged to take early retirement. So, I kept my mouth shut. I filed a routine patrol report with no mention of lights or voices or impossible burn marks. But I kept the photos, kept my notes, and started keeping a separate private log of everything strange I encountered on Highway 666. Over the years, that log grew thick with incidents that had no rational explanation, and I learned I wasn't alone. There was an informal network of officers, past and present, who'd seen things on that road. We didn't talk about it openly, but we knew how to recognize each other. A certain look in the eyes, a particular hesitation when discussing patrol routes, the way we all unconsciously checked our mirrors more often than necessary. The summer of 2003 was when everything came to a head. There had been a drought that year, the worst in decades. The desert was even more barren than usual. The few water sources dried up. The vegetation withered and brown. The heat was oppressive, regularly hitting 115 degrees during the day, barely dropping below 90 at night. It was the kind of heat that made people do crazy things, that brought out the worst in everyone. The number of domestic violence calls spiked, bar fights increased, and there were more fatal accidents on the highways than we'd seen in years. But there was something else happening that summer, something the media never reported and the department kept strictly classified. People were disappearing along Highway 666 at an unprecedented rate, not just one or two, which might be explained by the harsh conditions or people getting lost in the desert. We're talking about 17 confirmed disappearances in a 3-month period, all along a 20 stretch of highway between mile markers 30 and 50. 17 people who simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind vehicles with no signs of struggle, no indication of where they might have gone. The department brought in search teams, helicopters, even cadaver dogs. They found nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no signs of violence. It was as if these people had simply ceased to exist. The FBI got involved, thinking it might be a serial killer or human trafficking ring. They set up surveillance, increased patrols, even used undercover officers as bait. But the disappearances continued, and no pattern emerged that made any conventional sense. I was working the night shift on August 15th when I got the call that would change everything. Dispatch reported an abandoned vehicle near mile marker 37. Hazard lights on, driver's door open. It was the exact scenario that had preceded several of the disappearances. I was the closest unit about 5 miles south, so I responded immediately. As I drove north, I noticed something strange. My odometer was running backward, not malfunctioning, not stuck, but actively counting down the miles as if I was driving in reverse while moving forward. The radio started picking up that same strange interference I'd experienced years before. Voices in unknown languages mixed with bursts of static that almost sounded like screaming. My thermometer showed the outside temperature dropping rapidly from 91 degrees to 72 to 58 in the span of 30 seconds. By the time I reached mile marker 37, my breath was fogging in the air and frost was forming on my windshield. In August in the New Mexico desert, the abandoned vehicle was a white Toyota Camry still running, driver's door open, just as reported. But something was wrong with the scene. The car looked new, showroom new, but it was a model from the early 1990s. The license plate was current, registered to a Maria Santos from Albuquerque. But when I ran the numbers, the system showed no such registration existed. The interior of the car was immaculate, except for one thing. The driver's seat was covered in what looked like sand, but sand that sparkled with colors that shouldn't exist. It seemed to move and shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I called for backup, but my radio wouldn't work. Not broken, not static, just complete silence as if I was broadcasting into a void. My cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual for that stretch of road, but the screen kept flickering, showing dates and times that made no sense. Sometimes years in the past, sometimes dates that hadn't happened yet. I was alone out there with whatever was happening, and I could feel something watching me from the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. Standing there beside that impossible car, I made a decision that probably saved my life, but cost me everything else. Instead of investigating further, instead of walking into the desert to look for Maria Santos, I got back in my cruiser and drove away. Not back to the station, not to file a report, but home. I called in sick for the first time in 15 years and spent the next 3 days trying to convince myself that what I'd seen had been heat stroke, exhaustion, maybe even a minor stroke. But the sand I'd inadvertently gotten on my uniform told a different story. Under a magnifying glass, each grain looked like a tiny sphere of glass containing swirling galaxies of color. When I tried to show it to my wife, she couldn't see the colors, just regular sand. That's when I knew something had marked me, changed me in some fundamental way. When I returned to duty, I learned that Maria Santos had been found. She was walking along Interstate 40, nearly 50 miles from where her car had been abandoned, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The strange thing was, according to her family, she'd been missing for 3 weeks, not the single night that had passed since I'd found her car. She couldn't account for the lost time, could only remember a bright light and voices speaking in what she described as the language of stars. The psychiatrist wrote it off as trauma-induced dissociation. Those of us who knew better recognized the signs of someone who'd been taken and returned. Over the following weeks, I started noticing patterns in the disappearances that the FBI and state investigators had missed, probably because they were looking for conventional explanations. The disappearances weren't random. Each victim had been at a specific location at a specific time, locations that formed a perfect geometric pattern when plotted on a map. The times corresponded to certain astronomical events, meteor showers, planetary alignments, solar flares. It was as if someone or something was using Highway 666 as a collection route, harvesting people according to some cosmic schedule we couldn't comprehend. I started driving the highway during those critical times, not to prevent the disappearances. I knew I couldn't do that, but to observe, to try to understand. What I saw during those vigils challenged everything I thought I knew about reality. Lights in the sky that moved in impossible patterns, creating geometric shapes that hurt to perceive with human eyes. Sections of the road that would suddenly exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. I once saw a Spanish conquistadors expedition crossing the highway, their horses passing through modern cars like ghosts. Another time, I watched a convoy of military vehicles from what seemed to be the future, their design unlike anything in current use, accompanied by things that might have been soldiers but moved with too many joints in their limbs. The Navajo officers on the force, the ones who still remembered the old stories, they understood what was happening better than the rest of us. Officer Ben Yazzie, who'd grown up on the reservation, told me about the ancient warnings about places where our world touched others, where the boundaries were thin. He said Highway 666 had been built along one of these boundaries, what his grandfather called a star road, a path used by beings that existed between dimensions. The highway department had unknowingly paved over something that should have been left alone, creating a permanent breach that things could pass through. The more I investigated, the more I realized this wasn't a new phenomenon. I found newspaper accounts going back to the 1940s, reports from traders and travelers about strange lights and missing time along what would become Highway 666. There were Native American petroglyphs in the area that depicted beings descending from the stars, taking people up into geometric shapes that looked remarkably like the patterns I'd been mapping. The military knew something too. White Sands Missile Range wasn't that far away, and there were rumors of experiments, of attempts to understand and possibly control whatever was happening on the highway. In September of 2003, I made a mistake that would end my career. I decided to follow one of the lights. It was a clear night, no moon, the stars so bright you could read by them. I was parked at mile marker 42, watching the horizon. When I saw it, a sphere of blue-white light moving slowly along the highway about 30 feet above the ground. Instead of observing from a distance like I usually did, I put my cruiser in drive and followed it. The light maintained a steady speed of about 45 miles per hour, and I stayed about 100 yards behind it, close enough to observe, but hopefully far enough to avoid whatever consequences might come from getting too close. As I followed, my instruments started going haywire again. The speedometer jumped between 0 and 120 miles per hour randomly, though I maintained a steady speed. The radio cycled through stations that didn't exist, playing music I'd never heard before. Sometimes what sounded like news broadcasts describing events that hadn't happened yet. My fuel gauge dropped to empty, then showed full, then began displaying symbols instead of numbers. But I kept following, drawn by a mixture of professional duty and personal obsession. After about 10 miles, the light suddenly stopped and descended to hover just above the road surface. I stopped, too, keeping my distance. Through my windshield, I could see the asphalt beneath the light beginning to shimmer and ripple like water. Then, emerging from that liquid road as if rising from a pool, came a figure, human in shape, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, limbs too long, moving with the fluidity that suggested its bones weren't arranged like ours. It stood there in my headlights for a moment, and even from 100 yards away, I could feel it looking at me, evaluating me with an intelligence that was vast and utterly alien. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into my mind in a voice that felt like mathematics being translated into emotion. It told me things I can barely comprehend, let alone describe. That Highway 666 was indeed a boundary, but not between worlds, between states of existence. That what we call reality is just one frequency in an infinite spectrum, and that there are beings that can move between these frequencies like we change radio stations. That the disappearances weren't abductions, but migrations, people who had been selected to exist on a different frequency to become something more than human. It showed me visions of where the missing people had gone, and I wish to God it hadn't. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive in any sense we understand. They existed in a place where time moved sideways, where consciousness could occupy multiple bodies simultaneously, where the laws of physics were more like suggestions. Some of them had adapted, evolved, become things that bore no resemblance to the humans they'd once been. Others were trapped in endless loops of transformation, their minds shattered by trying to perceive reality from angles the human brain wasn't designed to process. The being offered me a choice. I could join them, step through the liquid road, and leave behind all the limitations of human existence. Or I could remain, but with the knowledge of what I'd seen, burned into my consciousness, forever changed by the truth of what lurks just beyond our perception. I chose to remain, though sometimes late at night, when I can feel the weight of that knowledge pressing down on me. I wonder if I made the right decision. When the being finally retreated back into the road and the light ascended back into the sky, I found myself parked at mile marker 37, 5 miles from where the encounter had started. My dashboard clock showed that 7 hours had passed, though it had felt like minutes. The fuel tank that had been full when I started my shift was now nearly empty. And on my uniform, I found more of that impossible sand-forming patterns that seemed to move and shift, creating symbols that almost made sense before dissolving into randomness. I drove back to the station in a daze, trying to process what had happened. When I walked in, the other officers looked at me strangely. Sergeant Martinez asked if I was feeling okay, said I looked pale, older somehow. When I looked in the mirror in the station bathroom, I understood what he meant. My hair, which had been solid black when I'd started my shift, now had streaks of white running through it. The lines around my eyes had deepened, and there was something different about the eyes themselves, a depth that hadn't been there before, as if they were seeing more than just the visible spectrum. I tried to continue my duties, but it became increasingly difficult. I could see things others couldn't. Shadows moving in patterns that defied the light sources casting them. Glimpses of other frequencies bleeding through. People who weren't entirely there, existing partially in our reality and partially somewhere else. The worst part was knowing that Highway 666 was just one of many such places. That these boundaries existed all over the world, and that the traffic between dimensions was constant and growing. The department started noticing my erratic behavior. I would refuse to patrol certain sections of highway at certain times, knowing what was scheduled to happen there. I filed reports about incidents that no one else could verify. I tried to warn people about the patterns I discovered, the correlation between the disappearances and cosmic events, but I was dismissed as paranoid, suffering from stress-induced delusions. The final straw came when I tried to prevent what I knew would be a mass disappearance event. October 2003 brought with it a series of astronomical events that to most people were nothing more than interesting news items. A solar maximum was approaching. Mars was closer to Earth than it had been in 60,000 years. And the Leonid meteor shower was predicted to be particularly spectacular. But to me, these weren't separate incidents. They were components of something larger, pieces of a cosmic mechanism clicking into place. The patterns I'd been tracking for months were accelerating, converging on a specific date, October 31st, Halloween night. The irony wasn't lost on me. I tried to warn my superiors. I prepared a detailed report showing the correlation between the astronomical events and the disappearances, complete with maps, timelines, and projections for what I believed would happen on Halloween. Captain Rodriguez looked at my report for exactly 30 seconds before setting it aside and suggesting I take some vacation time. When I told him that based on the patterns, we could expect at least 20 disappearances in a single night. He made the suggestion mandatory. I was placed on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. But I couldn't just sit at home knowing what was coming. My wife, Rosa, had already moved back to her mother's house in Las Cruces, unable to deal with what I'd become. The midnight ravings, the obsessive note-taking, the way I would stare at empty spaces, seeing things that weren't there or weren't supposed to be there. She still loved me, she said, but she couldn't watch me disappear into madness. I couldn't blame her. From her perspective, that's exactly what was happening. On the night of October 30th, I loaded my personal vehicle with everything I thought I might need. Cameras, both digital and film, recording equipment, flares, emergency supplies, and my grandfather's rifle, though I knew conventional weapons would be useless against what was coming. I also brought the collection of items I'd gathered over the months. The impossible sand, fragments of melted asphalt that contained swirling galaxies, a piece of metal from a crashed vehicle that was somehow both solid and liquid simultaneously. These objects had changed me, allowed me to perceive things on different frequencies. I hoped they might also protect me from being taken. I drove to Highway 666 as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of blood and shadow. The road was busier than usual. People traveling for Halloween parties. Families heading to Albuquerque or Denver for the holiday weekend. They had no idea what they were driving through, what was preparing to manifest around them. I positioned myself at mile marker 37, the epicenter of the pattern I'd identified, and waited. As midnight approached, the temperature began to drop, just as it had that night in August. But this was more extreme. My thermometer showed 35 degrees Fahrenheit, impossible for October in the desert. My breath came out in thick clouds, and frost spread across my windshield in fractal patterns that seemed deliberately designed rather than random. Then the lights began, not just one or two, but dozens of them descending from the sky like falling stars that stopped their descent just above the highway. They stretched for miles in both directions, pulsing in synchronization, creating a rhythm that I could feel in my bones. The very air seemed to vibrate, reality itself trembling like a struck bell. Cars on the highway began to slow, some pulling over, others simply stopping in the middle of the road as their drivers stared up at the impossible display. I got out of my truck, camera in hand, and started documenting everything. Through my viewfinder, I could see more than just the lights. I could see the geometric patterns they were creating in the air, complex mathematical structures that hurt to perceive, but were beautiful in their alien perfection. I could see the boundaries between dimensions becoming visible, like cracks in glass spreading across the sky. And I could see them, the beings that existed between frequencies, moving through our reality like we were the ghosts, not them. The first disappearance happened at 12:17 a.m. A family in a minivan simply ceased to exist between one moment and the next. Their vehicle remained, still running, but they were gone. Not taken, not transported, but shifted to a different frequency of existence. I could still see them, or what they were becoming, existing in the spaces between seconds, transforming into something that human language has no words to describe. More vehicles began to empty, their occupants transitioning to whatever lay beyond our narrow slice of reality. But something went wrong with the process. One of the lights flickered, its pulsing falling out of sync with the others. The geometric patterns in the sky began to distort, and I heard or felt something like a scream that existed below the range of human hearing, but made every cell in my body vibrate in sympathy. The being I'd encountered weeks before materialized on the road in front of me. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were dozens of them, all manifesting simultaneously, and they were agitated, moving with an urgency I hadn't seen before. The lead being approached me, and once again, I felt its consciousness brush against mine. But this time, Instead of offering choices or showing visions, it was seeking help. The images it projected into my mind were fragmented and chaotic, but I understood the essence. The boundary between dimensions wasn't just opening, it was rupturing. Something had gone wrong with their careful manipulation of the crossing points. Instead of a controlled migration, they were facing a catastrophic merge of realities that could destroy both our dimension and theirs. The being showed me what needed to be done. The pattern had to be completed, but it required something from our side. An anchor point in our reality to stabilize the boundary. It needed someone who had been exposed to both frequencies, someone who could exist partially in both dimensions without losing cohesion. It needed me. I want to say I thought about it, that I weighed the decision carefully, but the truth is there was no decision to make. I could feel the rupture growing, reality itself beginning to unravel at the edges. I could see past and future colliding, the desert simultaneously existing in every moment of its history. Spanish conquistadors marched through modern RVs. Native Americans on horseback rode alongside cemeteries. And things that might have been humans from some distant future flickered in and out of existence. If the rupture wasn't stabilized, both dimensions would collapse into something that neither could survive. I walked to the center of the pattern, to the spot where all the lights converged directly above mile marker 37. The beings surrounded me, their forms becoming more solid as I approached the convergence point. I could feel myself beginning to shift, my consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of my physical form. I existed in multiple moments simultaneously. I was 5 years old, listening to my grandmother's stories about the desert spirits. I was 23, taking my oath as a state trooper. I was 54, standing in the middle of Highway 666 as reality came apart at the seams. And I was ancient, older than the desert itself, watching the first humans cross this land. The impossible sand I'd collected began to glow, rising from my pockets to swirl around me in patterns that matched the geometric structures in the sky. The fragments of altered reality I'd gathered acted as focusing lenses, allowing me to channel the energy needed to stabilize the rupture. I became the anchor point, existing simultaneously in our dimension and theirs, holding the boundary in place through sheer force of will and the changes that had been accumulating in my body since my first encounter with the lights. The process was agony and ecstasy combined. I could feel every atom in my body being rewritten, adjusted to exist on multiple frequencies simultaneously. My consciousness expanded beyond anything I could have imagined, touching the minds of everyone who had ever disappeared along this highway. They weren't gone. They were transformed, existing in a state of being that transcended our understanding of life and death. Some had adapted beautifully, becoming creatures of pure thought and energy. Others were trapped between states, neither fully here nor fully there, crying out for release. Through my expanded perception, I could see the entire pattern now, not just Highway 666, but the global network of crossing points, boundaries, and thin places where dimensions touched. I understood that what was happening here was happening everywhere, that humanity was being slowly prepared for a transformation that had been planned since before our species evolved. The disappearances weren't random or malevolent. They were a selection process, choosing individuals with specific genetic markers, specific consciousness patterns that would allow them to survive the transition to a multidimensional existence. But humanity wasn't ready. We were supposed to have centuries more to evolve to develop the mental and physical capabilities needed to handle the transition. Something had accelerated the timeline. Perhaps our nuclear experiments. Perhaps our ventures into space. Perhaps simply the exponential growth of our technology. The beings from the other frequency were trying to manage a process that was spiraling out of control. And Highway 666 had become ground zero for their attempts to slow things down. As I held the rupture stable, preventing the catastrophic merger of dimensions, I saw possible futures branching out like a tree of light. In some, humanity successfully made the transition, becoming something wonderful and terrible, spreading across multiple dimensions like gods. In others, we failed to adapt, our reality collapsing into quantum foam, erasing not just our present, but our entire history. The path we would take depended on choices being made right now, in this moment, on this highway. The stabilization process felt like hours, but lasted only minutes in our time frame. When it was complete, the lights began to withdraw, ascending back into the sky one by one. The geometric patterns dissolved. The cracks in reality sealed themselves, and the normal October warmth returned to the desert. The beings faded from view, but I could still feel them, existing just outside our normal perception, watching, waiting, preparing for the next convergence. When the last light disappeared, I found myself standing alone on Highway 666, surrounded by empty vehicles. 23 cars, trucks, and RVs sat abandoned on the road. Their occupants successfully transitioned to the other frequency. But something had changed in the process. The transition was cleaner, more controlled. The people who had been taken weren't trapped between states. They had made it fully across, their consciousness intact, their transformation complete. I had helped save them, even as I had helped save our reality from rupture. The official report stated that a chemical spill from an overturned tanker truck had caused mass hallucinations along Highway 666 on Halloween night, resulting in multiple drivers abandoning their vehicles in panic. The missing persons were explained as people who had wandered into the desert while disoriented and died of exposure, their bodies consumed by scavengers or lost in the vast emptiness. It was a neat, tidy explanation that everyone could accept that let everyone sleep at night. The families of the disappeared were given death certificates, insurance payouts, and encouraged to move on with their lives. But I knew the truth. I could still feel them. The ones who had transitioned, existing in their new state just beyond our perception. Sometimes in the moments between waking and sleeping, I could almost hear them, their consciousness brushing against mine like whispers in a language made of pure mathematics and emotion. When the sun rose on November 1st, 2003, I was found by State Trooper Jennifer Martinez standing in the middle of Highway 666, surrounded by 23 abandoned vehicles, my hair completely white despite being only 54 years old. I remember the look on her face when she saw me, a mixture of recognition and horror, as if she was looking at someone she knew but who had been fundamentally altered. Her hand went to her weapon instinctively, not because she thought I was dangerous, but because some primitive part of her brain recognized that I had become something other than entirely human. The dashboard camera for my personal vehicle, which I had carefully positioned to record everything, showed only static for the crucial hours between midnight and dawn. The digital photos I'd taken revealed nothing but blurred lights and distorted landscapes that could have been anything or nothing. The film cameras had fared even worse. The film was completely exposed, as if it had been bombarded with radiation. The only evidence of what had really occurred was in my own transformed body and consciousness. And that evidence made me appear insane to anyone who hadn't experienced what I had. They took me to the University of New Mexico Hospital in Albuquerque for evaluation. For 3 days, I underwent every test they could think of: MRIs, CT scans, blood work, psychological evaluations. The physical tests showed anomalies they couldn't explain. My brain activity was off the charts, showing patterns usually only seen in advanced meditation states or near-death experiences. My blood contained trace elements that shouldn't exist naturally on Earth. Isotopes that suggested exposure to cosmic radiation of a type never before recorded. My DNA showed subtle mutations. Nothing dramatic, but enough to suggest I had been exposed to something that had rewritten portions of my genetic code. The psychological evaluation was where things really fell apart. Dr. Patricia Vaughn, the psychiatrist assigned to my case, was thorough and not unkind. She listened patiently as I tried to explain what had happened, though I could see in her eyes the growing conviction that I had suffered a complete psychotic break. When I told her about the beings from other dimensions, about the rupture in reality, about serving as an anchor point between worlds. She made notes about elaborate delusion systems and dissociative episodes with paranoid features. The worst part was when they brought in Rosa, my wife of 23 years. She sat across from me in that sterile hospital room, tears streaming down her face, begging me to accept help, to take the medication, to admit that what I had experienced was a hallucination brought on by stress. I wanted so badly to comfort her, to tell her what she needed to hear. But I couldn't lie, not about this. When I looked at her, I could see her existing on multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously. The Rosa who was my wife in this reality. The Rosa who had died in a car accident in another timeline. The Rosa who had never married me in yet another. All these versions of her overlapped in my perception, making it difficult to focus on just the one sitting in front of me. Captain Rodriguez came to visit on the 4th day. He was a good man, had always been fair with me, and I could see he was struggling with what to do. He sat down heavily in the visitor's chair, his uniform immaculate as always, but his face showing the strain of the past few days. The department was under pressure to provide answers about what had happened on Highway 666. 23 people were missing, their families demanding explanations. The media was starting to pick up the story, and there were already conspiracy theorists claiming everything from alien abduction to government experiments. Raman, he said, using my first name for perhaps the 3rd time in our entire professional relationship. I need you to help me understand what happened out there. The official investigation is leaning towards some kind of mass hysteria event, possibly triggered by an unknown chemical agent. But you were there. You were at the center of it. What really happened? I could have lied. I could have agreed with the chemical spill theory, taken early retirement on medical grounds, and lived out my days quietly. But something in me refused to deny what I had experienced, what I had become. So I told him the truth, all of it, knowing how it would sound. I told him about the patterns I'd been tracking for months, about the beings from other dimensions, about the convergence and the rupture, and my role in preventing a catastrophic merger of realities. I showed him the impossible sand that still clung to my uniform, the sand that contained swirling galaxies visible only to those whose perception had been altered. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out a document from his briefcase. It was a medical retirement package already prepared, requiring only my signature. The terms were generous. Full pension, comprehensive medical coverage, even a disability supplement for injuries sustained in the line of duty. All I had to do was sign and agree to ongoing psychiatric treatment. Take the deal, Ramon, he said quietly. Please, for Rosa or yourself. The department can't support what you're claiming. If you insist on this version of events, we'll have no choice but to proceed with involuntary commitment. You'll be institutionalized, possibly for years. Your pension will be forfeit. Rosa will be left with nothing. But if you take the medical retirement, you can get help get better. Maybe have some kind of life. I signed the papers, not because I believed I was mentally ill, but because I realized that fighting the system would accomplish nothing except my own imprisonment. I needed to be free to understand what had happened to me, to explore the changes in my consciousness, to monitor the ongoing situation with the dimensional boundaries. I couldn't do any of that from a psychiatric ward. The next months were a special kind of hell. I underwent psychiatric treatment as required, taking medications that did nothing for my condition, but made me feel disconnected from the enhanced perception I had gained. Rosa tried to be supportive, but I could see the fear in her eyes every time I forgot to pretend to be normal. Every time I stared too long at empty spaces, seeing things that weren't supposed to be there. Every time I woke up screaming from dreams that weren't dreams, but memories of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The breaking point came in February 2004. I had been home for 3 months trying to rebuild some semblance of normal life when the next convergence began. I could feel it building for days, the familiar sensation of reality growing thin, dimensions pressing against each other like tectonic plates building tension before an earthquake. I knew another mass transition event was coming, knew that more people would disappear, and I also knew that without someone to serve as an anchor point, the risk of dimensional rupture was significant. I tried to warn the authorities, calling the state police, the FBI, even attempting to contact military officials at White Sands. But my reputation preceded me. I was the cop who had gone crazy on Highway 666, who claimed aliens were abducting people into alternate dimensions. No one would listen. The night of February 15th, I left the house while Rosa was sleeping and drove back to Highway 666. I couldn't let another rupture occur. Couldn't risk the catastrophic merger of realities, even if it meant sacrificing what remained of my normal life. The convergence was smaller than the Halloween event, but no less intense. This time, I was prepared. I had spent months learning to control my enhanced perception, to consciously shift between dimensional frequencies, to communicate with the beings that existed in the spaces between realities. When the lights descended and the geometric patterns began forming in the sky, I was ready. I took my position at the anchor point and facilitated the transition of 7 individuals who had been selected for dimensional migration. This time I was able to communicate with them before they crossed over to explain what was happening, to give them a choice. Most were terrified, but one, a young physics professor from Albuquerque named Dr. Sarah Chun, understood immediately. She had been working on string theory, on mathematical models of multiple dimensions, and what she was experiencing confirmed her theoretical work. She chose to transition consciously, eagerly, even seeing it as the ultimate opportunity to explore the true nature of reality. After the convergence, I didn't return home. I couldn't. Rosa had woken to find me gone, had seen the news reports about more disappearances on Highway 666, and had connected the dots. When I called her, she was sobbing, begging me to come home, to get help, to stop this madness. But we both knew it was too late for that. I had chosen my path, or perhaps it had chosen me. I couldn't be the husband she needed, couldn't pretend to be normal when I had become something else entirely. I sent Rosa divorce papers and moved to a remote cabin in the San Rito Mountains, purchased with part of my retirement settlement. The location was chosen carefully, far enough from major populations to avoid scrutiny, but close enough to Highway 666 and other dimensional crossing points to monitor activity. The mountains themselves were a place of power, where Native American peoples had long reported spiritual experiences and visions. I suspected, correctly, as it turned out, that the altitude and geology created natural conditions that made dimensional boundaries thinner. Over the following months and years, I discovered I wasn't alone in my transformation. There was a loose network of individuals who had been changed by contact with dimensional crossing points. People who existed partially in multiple realities and could no longer fully integrate into normal society. We found each other through careful communication, through coded messages and paranormal forums, through dreams that weren't quite dreams, where consciousness could meet across dimensional boundaries. There was Marcus Webb, the Texas state trooper I mentioned, who patrolled a section of Route 287 that experienced similar phenomena. Lisa Brennan, a park ranger from Olympic National Park who had encountered something in the deep forest that had left her able to see through time, experiencing past, present, and future as a single continuous moment. David Hopa, a Hopi elder who had always known about the crossing points, whose people had oral traditions going back millennia about the star people and the times of transition. Together, we began to piece together the larger picture. The dimensional convergences weren't random events, but part of a carefully orchestrated process that had been ongoing for millions of years. Earth, it turned out, was a kind of nursery, a place where consciousness evolved to the point where it could transcend physical dimensions. Every species that had developed on our planet had eventually faced this transition. The dinosaurs hadn't been wiped out by an asteroid. They had evolved beyond physical form. The same with countless other species that had seemingly gone extinct. Humanity was approaching its transition point, but we were doing so chaotically without the gradual preparation that most species underwent. Our rapid technological advancement, our nuclear experiments, our ventures into space had accelerated our consciousness evolution beyond our physical and social evolution. The beings from other dimensions who we learned were themselves evolved humans from alternate timelines where the transition had occurred successfully were trying to manage our chaotic evolution to prevent us from destroying ourselves or rupturing the dimensional boundaries beyond repair. The selection process for who would transition and who would remain was complex based on factors we were only beginning to understand. It wasn't about intelligence or morality or physical fitness. It was about consciousness flexibility, the ability to exist in multiple states simultaneously without losing coherence. Some people were born with this ability. Others developed it through exposure to crossing points or dimensional artifacts. And still others would never develop it no matter how much exposure they had. I became something of a shepherd for those beginning the transformation, helping them understand what was happening, teaching them to control their enhanced perception, preparing them for either transition or for life as a bridge between dimensions. It was lonely work, isolated from normal human society, but it was necessary. Someone had to stand at the boundaries. Someone had to help manage the transition. Someone had to ensure that humanity's evolution didn't become humanity's extinction. The years pass strangely when you exist in multiple time streams simultaneously. I aged in some dimensions while remaining young in others. I watched civilizations rise and fall in alternate timelines, saw the various paths humanity might take, witnessed both our greatest triumphs and our most catastrophic failures. The knowledge was both a blessing and a curse, showing me the vast potential of our species, while also revealing how precariously we balanced on the edge of transformation or annihilation. In 2013, exactly 10 years after the Halloween convergence, I witnessed something that changed my understanding once again. A young girl named Emma Thompson, only 13 years old, not only survived a dimensional convergence without any preparation or anchor point, but managed to consciously navigate between dimensions at will. She represented a new generation, children born after the millennium who seemed naturally adapted to multidimensional existence. They didn't need the traumatic transformation that my generation had undergone. They were born ready for the transition. Emma and others like her gave me hope. Perhaps humanity wouldn't need centuries to prepare for the transition. Perhaps we were already evolving, already adapting, already becoming something more than we had been. The children understood instinctively what had taken me years to learn, that reality was fluid, that consciousness was the only constant, that the boundaries between dimensions were constructs that could be transcended with the right perspective. I began working with these children, teaching them what I knew while learning from their instinctive understanding of multidimensional existence. We established a kind of school hidden in the mountains where those with enhanced perception could learn to control and develop their abilities. The outside world thought it was a treatment center for children with dissociative disorders, which wasn't entirely wrong from a certain perspective. As I write this in 2023, 20 years after the Halloween convergence, the transformation of humanity is accelerating. The dimensional boundaries grow thinner each year. More people are experiencing spontaneous perception shifts, seeing through the veil between realities. The governments of the world know something is happening, even if they don't understand what. There are secret projects, attempts to weaponize dimensional travel, efforts to prevent the transitions. They will all fail because they're trying to control something that can't be controlled, trying to prevent an evolution that's as inevitable as the sunrise. Highway 666 no longer exists on maps, renamed in a futile attempt to change its nature. But the crossing point remains active, one of dozens around the world that serve as gateways between dimensions. I still monitor it, still serve as an anchor point when needed, still help facilitate the transitions of those ready to evolve beyond singular dimensional existence. It's my purpose now, my duty, my privilege to stand at the threshold between worlds and help humanity through its greatest transformation. To those reading this who have experienced missing time, who have seen lights that shouldn't exist, who have felt reality shift around them, you're not crazy. You're evolving. The strange experiences, the perception shifts, the sense that reality isn't quite solid anymore. These are all symptoms of your consciousness expanding beyond three-dimensional limitations. Don't fight it. Don't let them medicate it away. Embrace it, learn to control it, and prepare for the choice that will eventually come to all of humanity. Remain in singular dimensional existence with all its limitations, or evolve into something magnificent and terrifying, something that exists across multiple realities simultaneously. The transformation isn't optional. It's happening whether we're ready or not. The only choice is how we approach it, with fear and resistance or with understanding and acceptance. I made my choice 20 years ago on a dark highway in the New Mexico desert when I stood between dimensions and held reality together through sheer will and transformed consciousness. Every day since I've lived with the consequences of that choice, the isolation, the knowledge that can't be shared with those who haven't experienced it, the constant awareness of existing in multiple realities simultaneously. But I've also lived with wonders beyond imagination. I've seen the birth and death of stars from perspectives outside of time. I've communicated with evolved consciousness that makes our greatest philosophers seem like children. I've witnessed the infinite possibilities of existence, the countless ways consciousness can manifest and experience itself. I've become something more than human while still retaining my humanity. And in that paradox, I found a purpose greater than anything I could have imagined as a simple state trooper patrolling the highways of New Mexico. This is my testimony, my warning, and my invitation. The dimensional boundaries are breaking down. The evolution of human consciousness is accelerating. The selection process continues, and more people disappear into other dimensions every day. Some go willingly, understanding what they're choosing. Others are pulled through by forces they don't understand. Still others resist and remain, but changed, transformed into bridges between worlds. Highway 666 was just the beginning, my personal entry point into a larger reality. There are crossing points everywhere now, places where dimensions bleed through, where the impossible becomes possible, where human consciousness can transcend its physical limitations. You might encounter one on a remote highway, in a deep forest, in the desert under a star-filled sky, or even in the heart of a city where reality has worn thin from millions of consciousness passing through the same space. When you do encounter a crossing point, and if you're reading this, feeling a resonance with these words, you will remember that you have a choice. You can turn away, stay in the comfortable illusion of singular reality, live out your life in three dimensions, or you can step forward into the unknown, embrace the transformation, and become part of humanity's next evolutionary leap. The choice is yours, but choose consciously, because once you step through, once you allow your consciousness to expand beyond dimensional boundaries, there's no going back to the simple, limited existence you once knew. My name is Sergeant Ramon Sandoval, and I stand watch at the boundaries between worlds. I am the anchor point, the bridge, the guide for those ready to evolve beyond singular dimensional existence. The highway that brought me to this destiny may have been renamed, but its true nature remains unchanged. It's still a crossing point, still a place where realities converge, still a gateway to transformation for those brave enough to take the journey. The lights are descending again tonight. I can feel the convergence building, reality growing thin, dimensions pressing against each other. Soon more people will face the choice. We'll have to decide whether to evolve or remain. I'll be there as I always am now, standing at the threshold, helping them understand what's happening, facilitating their transformation if they choose it, stabilizing reality if they don't. This is my purpose now, my burden and my gift. To serve as humanity's guardian at the dimensional boundaries, to help our species through its greatest transformation, to ensure that when we finally evolve beyond our current form, we do so with consciousness intact, with choice preserved, with the essence of what makes us human carried forward into whatever we become. The highway is calling, the lights are descending, reality is shifting, the transformation continues, and I stand watch now and always at the crossing points between worlds.